Section 5, 1963 to today. Chapter 21, When Death Comes. Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robinson, Carol Dempsey, McNear, Adie Mae Collins. These were the names of 4 girls killed in a church bombing. It's September 16th, 1963. The Hurley Turbine. Angelica Davis was a college student, a junior at Reynolds University, when she named the newspaper, 4 girls killed in Birmingham, Alabama. Angelica Davis was from Birmingham. She knew these names. Her mother, Alice, had taught Carol Denise in the 1st grade. The Robinson and the Davis families had been close friends as long as she could remember. The Wesleys lived along the block in the Hill Birmingham neighborhood where Angelica grew up. Angelica's mother was interned by the bombings. It was a frightening and painful moment. But the Davises were active, and by active, I mean activists. Sally Davis had been a leader in the Southern Negro Youth Congress, an anti-racist organization that possessed racial and economic disparities. On Dynamite Hill, where Angela Davis grew up, Daylight and her husband trained their daughter to be an anti-racist, until most of her childhood was spent wrestling with the poverty and racism around her. Why didn't her classmates have certain things? Why were they angry? Why weren't they able to eat at school? She even decided early that she would never, despite the pressure, desire to be white. She fought and spoke out all the way until she got to college at Brandeis, a predominantly white institution, where she didn't agree with the kind of racist activism going on. An activism laid out by white people who couldn't see where they were from. But she found her outlets. She found a place to put her activism countedly. Activist energy. James Baldwin, one of Davis's famous authors, came to Brandeis in 1962, just before the release of his activist manifesto, The Fire Next Time. Baldwin crafted a collection of essays that inculcated the black experience with racism. The book contained a letter up to his nephew, warning him of the oppression coming his way. Another letter addressing the central celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation, in which he charged both blacks and white Americans to attack the nasty legacy of racism. It was a macro and micro examination of the American race machine. And Malcolm X, and ultimately a masterclass in anti-racism. Malcolm X also came, and though Davis just didn't agree with these religious feelings, she really fell in line with his political ideas. She was fascinated by the way he explained the racism black people had interfered in an inferior complex forced by them by white supremacy. But during Davis's junior year, she was emotionally transported home when she read the 4 names in the Tribune. Cynthia Wesley, Robertson, Carol Denise McClare, Adie Mae Collins, back to Dynamite Hill. Davis didn't see this moment as a special event, an off-one incident. No, she had grown up fully aware of anti-racism and its deadly potential. All she could do was swallow it and use it as fuel to keep fighting. President John F. Kennedy, on the hand, had to figure out how to fix it. Well, there was no fixing that, but at least he had something to do to snuff out what became a complete explosion on Dynamite Hill. He launched an investigation, which, by the way, caused his approval ratings to drop. Can you believe that? 4 children were bombed. Bombed. And because the president tried to get to the bottom of it, his Southern Constitutionists and supporters were really upset. Kendi tried to rebound, tried to boost his ratings back up in Dallas 2 months later. He never made it back to the White House. 2 days after Kennedy's burial, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was president, proclaimed that the civil rights bill that he had been working on would be passed. But what did that mean? On paper, it would mean that discrimination on the basis of race was illegal. But what it actually meant was that white people, even if those in favor of it in theory, could then argue that everything was now fine. That black people should stop crying and fighting and get over everything, because now things were equal. It meant they argue what they've been argued. But black people's circumstances were caused solely by themselves. It meant they completely ignored the hundreds of years of head starts white people had in America. And the worst part, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which caused white people to rethink white supremacy and superiority, and instead of dealing with that, they turned it on its head. Flipped it around, did the old okie dokie, and claimed that they were now the victims. That they were being treated unfairly, unjustly, so even though the act was supposed to outlaw discrimination, ended up being a backlash for more racist ideas. Nonetheless, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the first civil rights legislation since the Civil Rights of 1875. Hours after President Johnson signed it into law on July 2nd, 1964. He hit the TV screen to play up the whole American ideal of freedom. His appearance on television might as well have been a sitcom. A show fully cast the best actors, complete with smiling faces and a laugh track. And black Americans, at least those who had shown up before, looked on entertained and fully aware it was all scripted and cut. Malcolm X, full of distrust for America, spoke out not against the bill, but about the likelihood of it actually ever been enforced. Who was going to make sure the laws being followed, the lawmakers, and law enforcers were all white and racist? Angela Davis felt the same way, and Angela and Malcolm weren't wrong. This was a political play. President Johnson knew that since he made it about Kennedy, this bill wouldn't hurt his position as president of the potential of getting elected. At least that's what he thought. But George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, an ultimate racist, threw a major wrench into Johnson's re-election plans. Wallace had taken a public stand for segregation the year before and received 1,000 letters of support, mostly from Northerners. Wait, what? Yep, Northerners. Sending in letters in support of Wallace's stance for segregation. This proved painfully that everyone, the North and the South, hated black people. Barry Goldwater, a senator from Arizona, was also running, which Goldwater had ushered in a new kind of conversation. His platform was that government assistance, which white people had been receiving for a long time, was bad for human beings, that it turned people into animals. Of course, this racist hit Godfather once black people started receiving government assistance. Funny how that happens, yet not funny at all. It's like someone telling that they hate your shoes, and then a week later, once they put you down and make you feel insecure, they start wearing them. This strange game of whether good's for the goose and not being good for the gander. A gander's a male goose, but for this example, a gander is a whole bunch of black people. But Goldwater, despite the support that he had from well-to-do whites, didn't worry Johnson either. Johnson was concerned about the black political movements, like the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the Student Nonviolent Committee, who weren't satisfied with what Johnson was doing for them. The Northern activists had been dealing with and protesting police brutality and exploitation. The Southern activists had survived and were continuing to serve the Klan. And what did Johnson offer them? What leverage did he grant the CP and NFDP? 2 seats in the Democratic National Conversation, which had barely nothing. No power. And without power, all the protesting in the world meant nothing. The shift went from fighting for civil rights to fighting for freedom. The difference between the two is simple. One implies a fight for fairness, the other a right to live. Malcolm X's empowerment philosophy of black national and unity, self-determination, self-pride, and self-pride and cultural pride started to sound like music to the ears of the NIC youth. At the end of 1964, Malcolm X returned from an intensive trip to Africa to a growing band of NFCC admirers and a growing band of enemies. Unfortunately, February 21st, 1965, at a Malcolm rally, Malcolm would be gunned down by those enemies. When James Baldwin heard the news in London, he was devastated. When Martin Luther King Jr. heard the news in Selburne, Alabama, he was calm, reflected, acknowledged that though they didn't always agree on methods, much like Du Bois in Washington and Du Bois in Gravery, they wanted the same thing. Malcolm X's death rocked the black anti-racist followers, especially the ones populating urban environments. It instilled a sense of pride, a sense of intellectual prowess, a sense of self into many. He made street guys feel like they had a place in the movement. He made athletes like Muhammad Ali a higher purpose than boxing. He debated and he constructed racism with a fearlessness many people had never seen, and his ideas evolved into a much inclusive constitution just before the end of his life. The media, however, did what they had been doing for decades, centuries. They spun his entire life into a boogeyman tale, devoid of context. Malcolm X's life was strangely and pitifully wasted, read a New York Times editorial. But anti-racists honored him and would have something to hold on forever to reference his ideas. Malcolm had been working with Malcolm and his autobiography, and the book would be published after his death. His ideological transformation from assimilationist to anti-white racialist to anti-racialist inspired millions. He agreed that though white people weren't born racist, America was built to make them that way, and that if they wanted to fight against it, they had to address it with the other racist white people around them. He criticized black assimilationists, called them puppets, especially the leaders who had exploited their own people to climb the white ladder. Malcolm X stated that he was for truth, not hate. Truth and truth alone, no matter where it was coming from. His autobiography would become anti-racist scripture. It would become one of the most important books in American history. President Johnson, still dealing with the hate from white people and the distrust from black people around the Civil Rights Act, decides to go even further than that bill. Decides to double down, dig his heels into the anti-racist mud. After the Anti-Racist Act came from the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And though it would cause, with what every bit of progress caused, right rage and resistance, the Voting Rights Act would become the most effective piece of anti-racist legislation ever passed by the Congress of the United States of America. End of Chapter 21.